Hello, my dear friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining me here today. I'm Arith Härger, and today I'm going to talk about the witch religion of old, a subject I have touched in this channel before a few times already, with bits of information scattered here and there, but today I would like to have a definitive approach that will hopefully explain quite a few historical misconceptions which have led to a belief in an ancient witchcraft religion which has shaped how we nowadays see witchcraft, especially for those who practice it and often have the tendency to speak of it as a religion when in fact it never was. And it is precisely due to the fact that witchcraft was never a religion that made it possible to survive through the ages until our days, mostly because it has always been a set of beliefs with many different approaches within folk traditions, which is able to adapt to the new cultural and religious realities of each period, shaping itself to the new realities and living on by the syncretism which enriches its pragmatic approach. Now, just before we start, given the mood of the season and the subject at hand, I would like to remind you that I have released a new EP with my experimental solo music project, Var Umn, and the EP is called Ritual. Indeed, it was composed to be used in your spiritual endeavors, as many of you asked. You can buy the digital copy at Bandcamp, and you can listen to it on over 20 streaming music platforms, right? More information about this EP and the idea behind it in a future video at Var Umn's own YouTube channel. Check the links below in this video, right? So thank you for your time and thank you for listening. Now, with no more delay, let's get started, my dear friends. If you please. There's often been this idea that before the coming of Christianity there was an ancient pagan religion that united all of Europe under its practice, and that somehow such a religion has survived to this day completely unbroken, unchanged. And that religion was witchcraft. Witchcraft, traditional folk magic, can be found almost anywhere across the globe. For the European case, we do find it indeed all across Eurasia even, and there are many similar points in it across every European country. To say that witchcraft is exclusively pagan, it is a mistake, because it is found in many other non-pagan religions and has been quite a strong pragmatic approach among Christians as well. It is a set of folk belief systems that have been carried out for generations, from generation to generation, adapting and shaping itself to every change in culture and religion. It is a syncretic set of beliefs which grows bigger by the several beliefs and practices it absorbs from many different influences, and it is still changing even today, still growing, right? Still moving. Although it may contain several religious concepts in it, it was never about religion, but about actively manifest an intention through a series of practices to cause an effect in order to affect. Traditional folk beliefs which hold on to magical practices regardless of religion, as the intention is to change life by means of magical intention, right? Now, in the early 20th century, it was quite common to describe witchcraft as a religion due to the focus on medieval witch trials and records, which seemed to have been a widespreading phenomenon all over Europe, obeying to specific patterns that were common almost everywhere. The fact is that much of these common aspects of medieval witchcraft were myths that had been progressively created by the Church of the Middle Ages in order to determine whether people practiced witchcraft and or were in league with the devil or not. Much of the confessions by alleged witches have been assumed to be authentic descriptions of witchcraft practices. The problem is that much of such confessions are too in line with what the Church wanted to find out. And we now know that many of such confessions, under torture and threat, were words poured out of fear and anguish hoping to escape execution. Because witchcraft has indeed survived into our days, it has also been assumed that it was due to the fact of being an ancient religion kept in secrecy, and that despite everything, the same ancient religion can still be found today among the descendants of those who kept the old ways, because despite the efforts of the church, this religion flourished for centuries. This supposed ancient movement was even termed the witch cult by some early 20th century scholars, which we shall get to that. This perspective would only change around the 1960s with more studies on this subject, which have taken into consideration the psychological aspects of the accusations and confessions. There was never such a thing as a pan-European religion of witches. There was, and is, however, traditional folk beliefs and practices that underwent many changes through history. What has remained is a syncretism of beliefs within traditional folk culture. Now, on another video, I've spoken about Margaret Murray, who started this whole thing of an apparent witch cult as a surviving evidence for a pan-European pagan belief system. She was brilliant, no doubt, and as I've said before, her hypothesis was quite interesting, but she didn't take into account a lot of details I've spoken about on that previous video. Before Murray, there were others who have already proposed theories that witches were followers of a pagan religion, but it was Murray that truly explored the idea and presented it in her thesis. It has to be said that, unlike her predecessors, Murray actually did her research and used actual trial evidences concerning witchcraft. However, one of the major problems of her thesis is that she did not take into consideration the torture and psychological pressure involved in the extraction of these confessions, but accepted the words of the alleged witches at face value and assumed that the confessions were actual descriptions of real events. Much of the confessions don't actually fit into remaining pagan belief systems of the Middle Ages and the early modern period, but in fact fit perfectly into ideas the Church created in relation to beliefs of the past, pre-established conceptions based on Roman models. Her work does not focus on anything outside the witchcraft trials or trial confessions of the Reformation period. She also did not focus on actual remaining pagan beliefs and folklore. She developed her work solely around the confessions. But more about this in the previous video. Suffice it to say that her work inspired many, and this idea of a witch cult as a surviving practice of a pagan European pagan religion, of a pan-European pagan religion, was quite hard to let go, right? Especially because the early 20th century was the stage for the creation of many neo-pagan and other New Age religions based on supposed ancient European pagan beliefs, and the idea of a, again, pan-European pagan religion expressed in the form of witchcraft was quite appealing to the development and spread of the New Age religious movements such as Wicca, which has prolonged to this day this romantic fantasy. And there was also, of course, Charles Leland and his famous Aradia, or the Gospel of the Witches, of which I've also spoken of in the previous video. Seriously, you should definitely watch it. But Charles Leland, which has been a source for many modern witches, was convinced that an ancient religion of witches existed. He even concluded that there may have been a holy scripture for witches, and he even went on an adventure to find it. As you know, he published Aradia in 1899 as the final result of his research. Well, he speaks of the goddess Diana and even goes to say that she was impregnated by her brother, the light bringer, Lucifer. The child of that union was thus named Aradia, whose task in life was to teach witches how to protect the weak against the strong. Aradia thus remained a figure of importance to witches, gathering naked with her at each full moon in the forest to celebrate with a consecrated meal called the Sabbath. Like I said, Murray did her research, but Leland did not. This was a work of a great confusing mixture of themes. Nothing of it makes sense if we actually look into the actual history of these figures related to witchcraft. I have not only spoken of Diana under the witchcraft theme, but also about Aradia, and I really do think you should watch those previous works, those previous videos, for more information on this subject, and you will certainly notice that Leland made his own fantasy by picking on several themes. He created a work of fiction. His work, Aradia, covers more of legends associated with Diana, but also describes practical magic. But it is pure fantasy, and indeed, to this day, Aradia is a work still central to many Wiccan sects. There wasn't a holy scripture, as Leland said, but he created one, and in a funny way, Aradia is now a holy scripture to many Wiccans, and Aradia as a figure likewise. So, leaving Leland's fantasies aside, let's return to Murray. It was Murray that truly began the witch cult hypothesis with actual proper research, even though her work has been long dismissed, but I think it's still worth reading. In Murray's work, she never argues that magic is real. Instead, she has made a study on the beliefs held by witches. Murray believed that by studying ancient myths, historical records, folklore and legends, it would be possible to find a set of rituals found in many countries through time. She argued that this set of beliefs and rituals existed as a religion followed by many people, but with the spread of Christianity, the older pagan ways had to be suppressed. So she tried to reconstruct what she believed were the inner structures of the witch cult. She went on to speak about the very structure of a coven, even, according to her, exactly 13 members, and in truth, the significance of the number 13 to magical practitioners today is precisely highly influenced by Margaret Murray's theories about it, and that such a coven was led by a master, often called the devil by the church. She further goes about arguing that this master was considered a god incarnate by the witches and had to be obeyed in all things, also having the task of instructing his witches in the performance of magic and rituals. So basically, she argues about the existence of an organization of witches that focused on this devil figure as the head of the coven, as a man who presided over the Sabbath, often dressed as the devil or a horned god, and he would conduct the religious services observed on the witches' Sabbath, and often leading his colleagues in fertility dances. Furthermore, she believed such a witch organization worshipped a god that might have been a two-faced deity called Janus or Dianos. Sometimes Murray even referred to the witch cult as the Dianic cult in honor of their god, perhaps Pan or Cernunnos, at the center of witch worship. Suffice it to say, Murray picks a lot of elements we do find in folklore and in the folklore concerning traditional folk magic and belief systems, and she joins several of these conceptions into creating a narrative that fits into her belief in a witch religion. But the great majority, the large majority of these conceptions are only found in trial confessions, such as witches meeting with the devil, renouncing the church in order to worship the devil, and that the devil would bear an iron rod and used it to beat people who tried to quit the cult, and witches had a mark on their bodies which could be evidences of being witches, and so on and so forth. And Murray picks these elements and several others, these elements of confession, and painted a picture of a man, head of the coven, dressed as the devil or another horned figure, and that when people were absent from the Sabbath or did not obey this master, would then be beaten by an iron rod, and that those who wanted to be part of the cult had to pass through a harsh ceremony in order to renounce their baptism, and those who entered the cult either by birth or by renouncing Christianity would then be given a witch's mark somewhere on the body in order to confirm their membership, and so on and so forth. It's a fascinating work, no doubt. Margaret Murray championed the idea of a long-lasting religion of witches and made it one of the most popular theories about European witchcraft. The more we read her work, the clearer it is where the influences come from on both the 20th century folklore concerning witchcraft and New Age and neo-pagan movements on witchcraft. It was Margaret Murray that popularized it. Such modern movements on witchcraft obviously only took the more romantic aspects of Murray's work, because the confessions also speak of horrible acts of cannibalism and child sacrifice. She also suggested that infanticide and cannibalism occurred within these supposed witches' organizations, going further to theorize on a 1918 paper that she found that babies, often unbaptized newborns, were sometimes taken by witches for special services. The babies would be killed, often by inserting a needle in the brain, and the flesh prepared for consumption. And one way to ensure witches never confessed was to feed them the tongue of a baby. This way the witch's own tongue would be as powerless as a baby's to reveal their secrets. Not surprisingly, later on, Murray turned back on this theory, especially on child sacrifice and dark magic, to make the witch cult more palatable. She was clearly trying to give life to her own wishes and beliefs, and she did actually, as much of modern-day ideas on witchcraft, especially among New Age movements, have been highly influenced by Margaret Murray. Which is funny when some people claim to practice witchcraft as something that has been passed down to them from generations through the family, as an ancient cult that has been kept in the family for centuries, something hereditary and whatnot, and then much of the performances and beliefs come from the work of Margaret Murray. I mean, as I said here before, a well-read witch is a powerful witch, and it isn't solely to have knowledge concerning the craft and then to put it to practice, but also because there's quite a lot of misconceptions and misleading assumptions and people. Anyway, Murray obviously claimed that a whole religion can be traced from the horned figures painted in cave walls in the Neolithic age to the early modern world before Christianity finally triumphed and eradicated the witch cult. But even so, somehow, there were those that did not let it die. I mean, part of Murray's work was also greatly influenced by the anthropological studies of George Frazer, as published in The Golden Bough. In this book, which I would like to eventually someday perhaps speak a little bit more about it, Frazer compares religions and folklore from around the world in an attempt to find commonalities. He developed the theory that many myths in many places can be traced back to fertility rites, and that many depended on the sacrifice, often symbolic, of a king or god who would later rise again. Fraser's work strengthened Margaret Murray's thesis of a widespread witch cult. These works were also influenced by the work of Charles Leland, as previously spoken, and by Jules Michelet's work La Sorcière, in which he states that the victims of the witch trials were women rebelling against the brutalities of life under feudalism and the church. His work, just like Leland's work, is complete fiction, but highly influenced by the political ideologies of his own time. Something here spoken before, again, in the previously mentioned video. Leland's and Michelet's ideas can also be found in Margaret Murray's theories and witch cult hypothesis as well. As you can see, the grounds for proposing a witch cult had been set out before, but it was Murray's scholarship that gave it greater credence. It gained great popularity to the point that Murray was given the job of producing the entry on witchcraft for the Encyclopedia Britannica in 1929, introducing her witch cult theory to the world. Something that, with further studies, no longer makes any sense whatsoever, not anymore. Murray had a brilliant academic reputation aside from these theories, and indeed her work on these witchcraft themes often overshadows her initial academic work. I mean, for good reason. But I do think we should separate the works, separate her academic time, right? Because she was indeed a brilliant woman. But her theory on the witch cult is just not plausible at all. Would be pretty awesome if it were true, but it isn't, unfortunately. And I thought I really had to speak about Margaret Murray's work again, because, and speaking of modern movements on witchcraft, her work and the work of the aforementioned people obviously greatly influenced Gerald Gardner, one of the most influential voices in modern Wicca and a keen follower of the witch cult hypothesis. Of course, he went on saying that he thought the underlying religion behind witchcraft had long ago died out until he apparently discovered a surviving coven practicing in southern England. Of course he did. It's the same thing as saying, I alone hold the evidences to the truth, so believe and follow me. And if you think I'm joking, well, literally, Gardner wrote many of the foundational texts of Wicca and helped to create several other covens precisely based on the supposed knowledge he gained through this mysterious discovery of a surviving coven whose evidences of its existence lay only in Gardner's own mind. Gardner's own influential book, Witchcraft Today, was published with an introduction by none other than Margaret Murray, of course. Gerald Gardner's work on Wicca was publicity to Margaret Murray's theories to reach a wider audience of 20th century people starving for something new, for something spiritually exotic, for an escapism from the harsh realities of the first half of the 20th century. What we see among these people is working together to promote what they wished to be true for their own individual gains and to further legitimize their authority, because the more you push a narrative, it will become deeply rooted in society until it becomes the truth. This is the psychology of politics. You want an ideology to be constitutional, enforced, established. You promote a narrative and spread it as much as possible until the idea is stuck on people's speeches and beliefs, and soon enough it is given to the people the illusion of choice, and they will fight for the fantasy you have created, further legitimizing it. But anyway, fortunately people are not utterly unaware. Many problems with the witch cult and other early studies of comparative anthropology started to emerge due to a lot of actual field work and discussions with people living within the cultures these authors have spoken of, and we have long come to the conclusion that there was quite a lot of misunderstanding of the involved beliefs, as well as a blend of several conceptions, legends and myths to create a forceful theory. The cherry-picked evidences these authors have presented to fit their preconceived notions of what they wanted to find have been debunked for quite some time. As I said, the great majority of Murray's work, aside from the influences from previous authors and their bullshit, was greatly focused on witch trial confessions. Therein lies one of the big problems of Murray's theory on the witch cult. Most of these confessions would have been given under coercion, and she simply did not take that into her analysis. For her, the alleged witches spoke nothing but the truth. The psychology behind these confessions is the exact same we still find today in confessions under threat and torture. People will confirm almost anything an interrogator suggests when in fear and under harsh methods of coercion. Murray even affirmed that legends of fairies may have been a reference to a tiny race of humans who once shared the land with modern humans and who may also have passed some of their religion to the witches. Now, it does not matter what are your personal beliefs when you are presenting a scientific work, right? Archaeologically speaking, this is not something you can confirm. However, due to Murray's academic position at University College London, it gave her theory respectability, and whatever she said was taken at face value at the time because of her academic position. One thing is having your own beliefs, another is presenting a scientifically researched work where you have to present plausible evidences that lead to accepting your beliefs as a valid theory. And it is important to state again, as I did on that previously mentioned video, please do watch it, that it would not be surprising that Margaret Murray was aware of the work of the American suffragette Matilda Joslyn Gage, who thought of the persecution of the witches as nothing but an expression of the misogyny deeply rooted in society. We are talking about early feminist political movements which reshaped the image of the witch to fit into their suffragist struggle. Mind you that I am not saying that such movements were wrong, because they were definitely not and were highly necessary. What I'm saying is that just the same way Jules Michelet reshaped the figure of the witch as an egalitarian figure to fit into the political ideologies of his own time, the early suffragist movements also picked and reshaped the figure of the witch to fit into their fight against the oppression of the patriarchy and against misogyny. The witch became an icon for these movements, but the reshaping of the figure of the witch to fit into these political movements changed the historical perception of the witch, and thus it became a figure that, historically speaking, was never what these movements have claimed it to be. In terms of comparison, and my apologies for the choice, but I mean, nothing else comes to mind right now, which is troubling, I think. Well, it's like the use of the swastika. An ancient symbol important in many different cultures was used for the 20th century political ideology, which reshaped its significance and forever changed its meaning under the collective understanding of the masses. And the original meanings have been highly overshadowed by the new meanings. The same thing happened to the figure of the witch under the models of the 20th century ideologies, which have given different significance to the witch, which overshadows its true historical identities, because the new meanings are obviously a lot more present in the modern mind, albeit certainly not with a long list of negative aspects to it as the swastika gained, unfortunately. So, it would not be strange that Margaret Murray was also aware of the work of Matilda Joslyn Gage. We are talking about a woman, Margaret Murray, who was also struggling to establish a foothold in a society controlled by the patriarchy, with highly misogynist beliefs. And her theory in the witch cult helped to give some authority to the feminine figure, even though she stated that the witch organization was controlled, almost governed by a male figure without any plausible evidences. And this might have been an attempt to make the witch cult theory more palatable, more accepted under the society she lived and worked in, a society governed by men. So the figure of the witch was highly used in the 20th century to right the wrongs people perceived within the world, regardless of gender. The 20th century reshaped the figure of the witch to the point that much of what we thought we knew about the figure of the witch were actually 20th century creations, some of which, quite a lot, were created after I was born, so quite recently in history. I have to underline this because some of you believe I've been around for centuries and I have to hide my true form and identity. Anyway, the thing is, no doubt that there were plenty of religions in Europe before the advent of Christianity. And indeed, folklore, talking about oral traditions, they can indeed preserve practices and traditions for centuries. And it is also possible that in some form a folk religion could have continued somehow, at least certain aspects of it, changed, reshaped, adapted, and we have absolutely no idea how they are manifested, as there's no concrete evidences, but certain religious aspects today in traditional folk magic and beliefs may indeed be surviving manifestations of other older forms of religious practice before the advent of Christianity. But the witch cult hypothesis is not possible, and it's not plausible, at least not from a scientific point of view, as there are no evidences for it. Unlikely that there was ever a witch religion, given the amount of new and well-researched information we have concerning the history of witchcraft. However, the witch cult theory is something that is strongly held by many still today. The work of Margaret Murray and others here mentioned before has been highly incorporated into the most widespread and strong New Age religious movement, Wicca, as well as into other neo-pagan belief systems. We see in the core of these new systems of belief a great influence from Murray's work, and certainly not from a supposed ancient witch religion. This is one of the biggest problems of Reconstructionism, holding on to preconceived notions of what modern people wish to find in ancient societies. And witchcraft, or rather traditional folk magic and beliefs, was never about holding on to a given religious notion, but rather the continuation and evolution of the human need to manifest into the world a necessity by actively engaging with the world in a pragmatic manner in order to create the change we want to see in it. So, my dear friends, I do hope this video was useful and somehow an eye-opener. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, thank you for today. Until we meet again, my dear friends.